The hidden pitfall is that the most critical part of applying this is presenting the results to decision makers. And you can undo weeks or months of exhaustive work in 30 minutes by an ill-advised presentation. The problem is that executives typically have the attention span of a 5-year-old child. That's what we used to say about the generals in the Air Force. They got the attention span of a 5-year-old child because they are easily bored. They've got so many things on their mind. They are immediately thinking about the next meeting they have to go to or the next big thing. An ill-considered executive presentation risks disinterest, less than enthusiastic support, and worst of all, interruption. So the challenge is to communicate the problem or the solution effectively. The most problematic trees for this are going to be the current reality and the future reality tree, because they are typically the ones, as you can see, that are the most involved, the most complicated, and would take the longest to go through. So your choice here is to bore the executive or to give them only the information that they require to render a favorable decision. And maintain the flexibility to expand to more detail, but only if the executive asks for it. So I put together the concept of executive summary trees. This is an extension to the thinking process of a decision briefing concept that we used in the military. Give the decision maker only the minimum information required to draw the conclusion presented in the current or future reality tree. You can present this in no more than 15 to 30 minutes. You can afford selective amplification of parts of the tree if and only if the decision maker asks questions. Don't try to impress him with all the work you've done. If you get a question, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Now you are required to show your logic, but only for that conclusion. All right? So here's how it works. It's about a 10-step process that is done after and only after you have a completed, thoroughly scrutinized current and future reality trees. Okay. So you've got to do that as your first step. Then what you do is you isolate the undesirable effects or the desired effects that are most important to the decision maker, and normally this will be all of them, especially if you've done a good goal tree. Okay. Now the example I'm going to use for the rest of this demonstration here is of a current reality tree, but it applies equally to future. Step 3, look at your complete current reality tree and identify all of the undesirable effects and all of the critical root causes. Take those and replicate those and put them on a blank piece of paper, or blank like a flip chart. Put the undesirable effects at the top and put the critical root causes near the bottom, and this is going to be the beginning of the executive summary tree. Then you go back to your current reality tree and you identify the major branches and convergence points. And there they are. You take those lines and you replicate those lines on your executive summary tree. Dotted lines, all right? You put them in place. Step 6, look for the convergence entities, the places where those lines come together, and the origins of those lines, and transfer those entities from the current reality tree onto the executive summary tree. So now what do we have? We've got the undesirable effects at the top, we've got the critical root causes at the bottom, we've got the other branches that are contributing, and we have the convergence points. Great. Step 7, identify key intermediate entities in each branch. In other words, you're going to deliberately create long arrows. After I went through 6 days telling you no long arrows, I'm telling you now you're going to put them back in. What you are going to do is deliberately create these long arrows, but you're going to make sure that they do not exceed the length of the leap of logic you think the executive can follow. This is a value judgment on your part. You're asking yourself, based on my executives, what I think is his understanding of the problem, if I give him a long arrow if then, how long a leap do I think he can follow? And so what I'll do is I will find intermediate entities that represent the length of a leap of logic that they can follow, and I'm going to transfer those into the tree as well. You have to consider the executive's familiarity with the system's inner workings. For example, if the chief executive came out of the financial community, you know that the branch that's going to talk about investment and financing can have long leaps because they're familiar with that. But if that same executive does not have much exposure to marketing and sales, you're probably going to have to make shorter leaps of logic so that the executive can follow it without questioning it. Same for production. If it's a production person, you're going to be able to make long leaps of logic in the production branch. Well, maybe not in the marketing and sales, and maybe not in the finance branch. Okay? Does this make sense? Okay? The idea is you're coming up with what looks like something like this. And look how many entities we have actually removed from the tree. If I start reading if, then, and notice there are no ellipses in this tree. We don't want to confuse them with discussions of sufficiency and additional cause and all of that. We're just looking for pure causality here. So, if all we're reading is if critical root cause, then intermediate effect, if an intermediate effect, then final effect, if final effect, then undesirable effect. How long did it take us to read that? Probably not more than a minute to go up that outer branch. And we've got 5 branches to read. This tells me here I can probably read all of the effects of this tree in no more than 10 minutes. Okay, step 9. Finalize the executive summary tree. You're going to convert the dotted lines to solid lines, and that's what you are going to actually brief the executive. Now, here's the trick. You have to be prepared for those inevitable questions. So, step 10, divide both trees. This is the full current reality tree and the executive summary tree into page-sized segments. All right? You're not going to display these page-sized segments in the executive tree. You got the whole tree to show that. But you have a little cheat sheet that says, all right, I know I have a complete expansion of just this portion that says page 1 on the executive side. And what I've done is I have taken a separate sheet of paper and I have put in all the detailed cause and effect for just that part of the tree. And I have it on page 1. And on page 2, I have all of the detail for page 2 and so forth for the whole tree. And what you're going to do is, if you have 5 pages or 6 that are going to replicate the detail, you want them in 5 piles. All of my page 1s are in one pile. All of my page 2s are in another 3, 4, 5. You don't want them stapled together in a complete set. And here's the reason why. I'm briefing you as the change agent here, and I'm going up this tree, part of the tree here. You're not seeing this blue part. You're not seeing these dotted lines here. All you're seeing is this, that, and that. And so I start reading up this branch here, and I say, if this critical root cause, this effect. And if that effect happens, then we're going to get this. And if this happens, then we get that. And as I'm going up here, let's say I didn't read you correctly, and I say this, then that. And you say, wait a minute. I don't see how you got that, how you made that leap. How did you come to that conclusion? Okay. I go over to the pile that has page 1, and I hand out to everybody around the table a page 1. And I say, follow along with me on your paper copies as I read this. And now I go through if and then, if and then, if and then. But I only go from here to there because that's all he asked about. I don't read him the rest. All right? Just what he asked about, then I revert back. Is that clear? Fine. If you'll rejoin me on this diagram. Now I read if and this, and so forth. Now, if you get to page 2, he's got another question. Hand out page 2, and only page 2. Why do I not give him a stapled copy of the whole thing. Why do you think?
He's
He's going to sit there not paying attention to what you're saying. He's going to be flipping pages and looking at this detail. You don't want that. You want eyes here. You can't tell him that, but you have to behave in a way that he pays attention to you and not to the paper. At the end of the whole thing, when you've covered the entire tree, most of the pages are still going to be sitting up here in the front. Because I can almost assure you, if you're ready to proceed step-by-step logic, and it's syllogistic logic all the way up to here, and you do that 2 times, he's not going to ask a 3rd time. He's going to assume that you've got the same logic for everything. And that's how you get out in 30 minutes with your credibility intact and a favorable decision. All right? But before he leaves, you have your assistant here who goes around the table and hands out pages 3, 4, and 5 and says, feel free to take these back to your office and look at these in more detail at your leisure. Then you have satisfied both things. They've got the complete story, but they haven't been distracted while you're doing the presentation. Okay? I've done this once, and it worked beautifully. I haven't had the opportunity to do it again, but ever since I've been doing it, I've gotten feedback from at least 3 or 4 other people that have said, hey, I did that executive summary presentation. It worked like a charm. So I know it works. Okay. Finally, again, as I said, you present only the executive summary tree, in other words, the whole big picture, and you pull out what you need only when a question is asked. If no questions are asked, you don't pull out of any of it. You can still give them the entire tree at the end, but you don't just interrupt the briefing for it. But when you do that, as soon as you have answered the direct question, you revert back to the summary tree again. And so here you go. That's the way it breaks out. This represents what you can get on one page, and it will be this part of the tree right here. Same thing for the other branches. All right?